I'd like to open my commentary about this module with a reflection on the concept of wilderness because, as you have read, it didn't always exist. This concept originated during the European Enlightenment when philosophers conceptually separated humanity, thinking beings, from inferior relics of creation that lack a capacity to reason. Wilderness and all who dwell there were considered less than. The Enlightenment philosophers considered wild nature as something to be controlled, something fierce to be conquered. This worldview saw the widespread establishment of colonial agendas that sought to enlighten the rest of the world by conquering wilderness and bringing order and rationality to uncivilized, in quotations, peoples and nature. This ethnoecology persists in cultures of European origin today. This fits with our ongoing consideration of the cultural perception that humanity and nature are separate, that wilderness is something apart from humans. But in this module, we explore evidence that the converse may be true. The assigned reading reveals that ecological and cultural diversity overlap if you map them on a globe. Because students in our class come from a variety of majors, I want to define these related terms. When the reading talks about biological diversity, it's talking about a rich pool of biotic wealth and information stored in the DNA of the many organisms that live in a particular geographic area. If you read about cultural knowledge, this refers to a reservoir of skills, systems, institutions, and cultural values that have evolved over millennia by stewards of local habitats. So this is traditional ecological knowledge and other cultural adaptations to local habitats. So when we say that ecological and cultural diversity overlap, what we're really saying is that the highest species richness zones on Earth are the same areas of highest cultural diversity, which can be quantified in terms of linguistic diversity, or the number of different human languages spoken in that geographical area. Richness, species richness here, is an index of the number of different species found in a given area. Linguistic richness then would be the number of different languages found in a given area. This is counterintuitive under the assumption that humans in wilderness exist in opposition, because more human traditions in an area would lead to more lifeways and strategies to extract resources, create pollution, and generally injure nature. So a few explanatory hypotheses have been suggested. The first is that biodiversity stems from abundant niche spaces and high primary productivity. These are areas that human groups also occupy. On the map here, I'm showing areas of high primary productivity in green, which is a reflection of the amount of the sun's energy that is captured in a habitat, converted from solar energy into chemical energy in plants that then animals can eat, and this fuels the ecosystem. So this could stem from a shared origin if human groups diverge the same way that different species do in these very biodiverse, highly productive habitats. Or it could be a reflection of human invasion, where multiple human groups originating elsewhere were attracted to the abundance of resources available in these highly biodiverse habitats. A second, not mutually exclusive explanatory hypothesis for the observation that ecological and cultural diversity overlap is the refuge hypothesis, that these are areas untouched by colonizers. And so there were both biodiversity and indigenous traditions have been able to survive. These are perhaps remote, difficult to conquer areas like internal hidden places deep within the Amazon rainforest, or mountainous regions in the Himalayas that were not contacted until recently in history. And the third explanatory hypothesis is that biodiversity is preserved by traditional knowledge, either accidentally or purposefully. And there's quite a bit of evidence supporting this particular hypothesis. One, traditional lifeways tend to make light demands on local resources, especially if integration with market economies is low. Also, traditional environmental knowledge is often on point. It is accurate, and local stewards of the habitat who have been living there for tens or hundreds of generations have accumulated the knowledge necessary to be effective stewards of their habitat. Cultural practices and values include effective stewardship, therefore. And sometimes colonizers have been kept out, which maintains local control of the land, where indigenous rights have been maintained over time. And so these locally curated stewardship practices have then been implemented continuously, which would lead to protection of biodiversity, protection from loss, and explain the observation. Now, counterexamples do exist, and the counterpoint is that humans often decimate ecosystems. And the classic example of this is Easter Island, here off the coast of modern-day Chile in the Pacific Ocean. The archaeological record reveals that humans arrived to Easter Island around 1200 CE or AD. They arrived by boat from Polynesia. Around the time people arrived, there were many species of tree on the island, 3 of which grew to over 15 meters tall. There were 6 species of land-dwelling birds and many types of seabirds that came ashore part of the year to nest. These images show moai, the giant iconic statues that you may have seen before. Easter Island is known for 2 things: these mysterious giant statues and, unfortunately, ecological collapse. Likely hastened by this rodent, the Polynesian rat, who arrived to the island with people, having hitched a ride aboard the conquering flotilla. At its peak, the population of the island reached 15,000 people, but this, combined with the invasive rat infestation, exceeded the island's carrying capacity. Native plants and animals went extinct, and the human population dwindled. By the time of European contact in 1722, there were no longer any land-dwelling birds on Easter Island. The archaeological record further reveals that 21 species of trees, including all those tall varieties, had gone extinct. This was disastrous because it meant that the people of Easter Island could no longer build boats. This prevented them from fishing offshore, which dramatically restricted their food supply. Further, the deforestation of the island led to erosion of topsoil, which likely reduced these horticulturalists' sweet potato yields. At European contact, the estimated population of Easter Island was between 2,000 and 3,000 people, and there was intense clashing between groups on the island. Archaeologists suspect cultural fission, which is a separation of one unified people into smaller, warring subgroups, which is a pattern that often happens when people are stressed and in conflict over control of scarce, life-sustaining resources. This week's discussion is a point-counterpoint activity. After completing the reading and multimedia assigned for this module, please write an informed argument supported by specific examples for only one of the following perspectives, so you're choosing either the point or the counterpoint. In either case, you're going to provide specific examples of cultural practices, traditional values, incentives that support your argument. If you take the point stance, you're going to present evidence that traditional ecological knowledge protects biodiversity and supports ecosystem stewardship. If, however, you choose the counterpoint stance, you will present evidence that some indigenous communities, like the one on Easter Island, have overtaxed the environment, leading to degradation. I look forward to reading your posts.